I am lucky enough to be joined by Alun Davies, Operations Director at ElectrAssure. Hi, Alan.
Hello, how are you?
All right, buddy. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well indeed.
Top man, busy, I understand.
Yeah. It's a busy time to be in this sort of space, so it's interesting.
Tell us, for those of you who don't know who ElectrAssure are, because you've been living under a rock, who are ElectrAssure?
We are, at our core, we're an electrical contractor. We're qualified electricians, but we, about 10 years ago, stepped into the EV charging market space when it was tiny. We were running around replacing the odd unit and doing a few bits for some funding agents who were out there, like Source East, Source London, etc., right in its infancy. In a sort of nutshell, fast forward to today, we've worked with the likes of Volkswagen and National Grid and Western Power, doing sort of larger and larger installs of our own that kind of have led up today, really, where we provide the full solutions that we do with sort of back office support, etc., and obviously still that sort of core engineering background that we have.
So you're somebody, qualified electrician, you're somebody who looks at the wires and goes, I know where they go. So if there are problems with kit, you really do understand the inner workings of each of these bits of equipment.
So something that we have taken very seriously and something that we've put a lot of effort into is to make sure that we're, call it elite trained, expert trained in the manufacturers we work with. So 2018, I went out to Slovakia to the factory of one of our manufacturers. They said, does anybody know what they're doing with these things? I said, yeah, I think so. He said, fine, strip it down, put it back together. So that was me for 3 days. I had a DC charger in bits. So, but that's how we behave. And, this morning I had my engineers in and we had one of the motherboards in bits and we were doing some upgrades onto the firmware and software and whatnots on the big screen in here. So it's in our interest to know these things inside out, because that way we can provide the ultimate support that we want to, which is, we know which bits are broken or which bits need replacing or what should be doing what at any given time.
So with a decade of experience like you've got and working with some household names, what are the things that you've learned are the key considerations that fleets need to undertake when thinking about putting in electric charging infrastructure?
There are lots, and it can seem quite daunting, which is why, there was a report out recently about from the AFP about people seeing it is easier just to continue to drive diesel vehicles rather than go to EV. And I sympathise, but then again, if you engage with the right people at the right stages, however that, in terms of assessing your driver behaviour and your mileage, that will give you a kind of indication as to whether the vehicles will work for you. And then you can move into how you would charge them. There are some obvious ones. The ones that people talk about a lot is obviously like electrical capacity. But a sort of a mistake I think that is, or rather an assumption that's made, is that if you don't have enough power, period, in your premises, the car park you're working from, then you must engage with the DNO for a new connection. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a solution. But these charging units are becoming more and more technically advanced, that you can do so many things with these things in terms of managing load, balancing them off, charging one and then the other and queuing them up and all sorts. So it's not necessarily as simple as we must have enough capacity or we're bust. It may sound really stupid, but making sure that you've got enough parking spaces, because we've come across that quite a lot, is, we need to charge 90 vehicles at this site and we've got 10 parking spaces. And it becomes like a game of Tetris for 9 hours a day. There are a lot of considerations, even down to how you're going to connect them to your back office. If you're going to do it via 4G, via a mobile SIM, have you got enough? Is the bandwidth good enough there? Is your mobile signal good enough? But these are things that if you engage with the right people, they really should be assisting you with, when we do our surveys, for example, we run around with mobile signal testers to each site to make sure that they have adequate signal there for the SIM cards to connect properly. And ultimately, I think it's really important that people understand that a charging provision isn't just a number of boxes. It's not units. It's got to be designed with the vehicle's drivers and the business needs in mind, because if it isn't, it won't work.
So with that in mind, then, what are the sort of the core things that a fleet manager or a business needs to consider as part of the project to get a really useful charging infrastructure in place? You've mentioned things like, site. Have you got enough parking places and electricity demand? What other things are there out there that you might need to consider?
So in order to make sure that it works for you as a business, you've got you'll have vehicles that will need to arrive and stay overnight, for example, and they can charge at a much slower rate, usually on an AC unit, and they can sit there overnight and they'll be fully charged when the driver comes back in the morning. If you know your driver's behavior, as I said earlier, if you know your driver's behavior and you know what their dwell time is going to look like, then you can understand how fast that vehicle needs to be charged. And ultimately, that should decide whether a row of 20 ACs is enough, or whether you need a super hub of 400 kilowatt DC chargers to roll these vehicles back out as quickly as possible, because they are on a timescale to get back out. That really will mean that you're not having drivers waiting. I think that's probably something, apart from range anxiety, that's probably the thing that people whinge about. Jeremy Clarkson famously whinged on an episode of Top Gear once, I don't want to waste my life waiting for my car to charge. And there is an element of fairness in that, because as a business, you don't want to be paying your drivers who should be out on the road to sit and wait to charge. So, but if your charging systems are designed with your drivers in mind, you avoid that, and therefore it becomes a support piece. It becomes something that they can use, obviously, as part of their daily operations, and it means that you're maximising the efficiency of that.
Now, there are new regulations which have just come out, and they talk about 99% uptime. We talk about having smart functionality. What is smart functionality?
The new smart charging legislation it's a bit of a funny thing, to be honest. Even when we first got it up on our projector here and read it through, we said, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, actually, and this, that, and the other. There are some things to take into consideration. The chargers have to have the capability to delay their own charging, to stop themselves from starting immediately, because they need to be able to assess the grid. We all have smartphones, smart being that they connect to the internet and they have additional functions. That's exactly what these things do. They connect to the internet through either through an Ethernet cable, an internet cable, or through Wi-Fi, or through 4G, like I mentioned earlier, through a SIM card. And they're able to be controlled in that fashion as well. So they're able to be given commands to stop charging, start charging, charge at slower rates, etc. But there's also silly things in there, like they must now have tamper switches. So if the cover's removed, the charger won't work. But again, it's trying to improve. It's particularly the chargers themselves, but it's trying to improve the sort of level that the charging manufacturers must achieve as a standard, which I implore. But at the same time, there are some sort of wiggly bits in there, I must admit.
I suppose it's ultimately to give some a better customer experience, so the driver knows what they're getting, and that the fleet manager can manage their network as efficiently and as effectively as possible.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we've historically, there's been sort of turns of phrase of smart chargers versus dumb chargers, if you will, chargers that aren't able to connect to the internet. And obviously, if you don't have a CPMS, you aren't able to control, manage, and monitor what those chargers are doing. So yeah, there is that. I mean, the smart charging legislation is probably there's a part of it at least that's keyed towards the smart grid as a whole, i.e. that they're able to be derated at times of peak grid loading, etc. But that's as a kind of wider function that the government are looking at. Many years ago, we were in Westminster for a sort of consultation on all of that, and they said, "Oh yeah, well we're going to, we're going to derate people's charges as part of this, that, and the other." And I said, "That is a minefield. How are you going to tell Dave down the road that he can't charge his car because you don't know he's got to go out at 10 o'clock and he's got no miles?" But anyhow, no, you're right though. The smart charging legislation really is designed to ensure that every charger that is installed in the UK has the ability to be controlled, managed, and monitored in a suitable fashion, so that it's not sort of an island, if you will. It's not just a piece of equipment that will charge at a certain rate, come what may.
Yeah. Now then, you mentioned the government, and they're aiming to have 300,000 chargers available by 2030. And at the moment, we've got something in the region of 60,000 connectors in the UK. Do you think that 300,000 by 2030 is achievable? And what challenges do you see that there might be in achieving that target?
I mean, the funny thing about that is, I know you've been in and around this space just as long as I have. And if you remember what it was like 10 years ago, when we were all, there was 20,000 public chargers out and about, but they were all 7 kilowatt. A lot of them were at an angle or didn't work. 20,000, we all went, yeah, but I still wouldn't drive an electric car on the public infrastructure. And, but now we're talking about 60,000, but these are 60,000 that have more, there's more insight gone into how they're designing these things. You look at the super hubs that are out in the service stations now, and they are light years ahead of the electric highway that was out the first.
That's right.
The very first ones, I can't remember, the ecotricity ones that were like
that's
the very
right.
first ones. They very often, no disrespect to anybody involved in any of this, but they very often drew sort of bad press for being unavailable and things like that. Whereas now you've got, your Teslas, Ionities, etc., who have bought into that sort of space and are providing public charging that works. I mean, I drive an electric car myself, and when I stop off at the services for something to eat and a wee and charge the car, they are populated. They're really being utilised. So that will. It was kind of the chicken or the egg thing, wasn't it? For a while, it was not people are driving cars to invest in the infrastructure, but people won't drive cars unless there's the infrastructure there. Whereas now there seems to have been a bit of a tipping point, particularly with, like I say, the regulators getting involved and more vehicles becoming available at varying price points. And so I think in a sort of long-winded way to answer your question, John, I think the likelihood is there will be a lot. I don't know whether they'll get to the exact number they're looking for, whether they'll get to 300,000 or not. But if you look at, the likes of like GridServe, and they're almost like they're forecourts, if you will. They're almost like petrol superstations for EVs and that sort of stuff. And EV charging is becoming a much, much more commonplace and much bigger part of the sort of the road network across the UK. And as that grows, the need for it will grow, and therefore you'll get more people in EVs. And I think, to be honest, 2030, 7 years away, did you say we're at 60,000 now? Is that right?
Yeah, roughly.
That's probably that's a reasonable. Yeah, that's quite a leap, but they may get close to it for sure. You just hope that any sort of government subsidies that are out there for these sorts of things continue to work, and that the price of electricity kind of stabilizes at some point. That would be nice.
Yeah, I think one thing that's certain though, Alan, if we do get somewhere near 300,000 charge points in the UK, ElectrAssure will have their fingerprints on quite a few of them.
Yeah. We've, as I say, we've our kind of our key market, if you will, what we feel we're best at is engaging with on a business to business level with commercial fleets, because obviously, as I said, there's a lot of services and support that we provide that really kind of leans itself towards those critical fleets, those fleets that have to be out and about every day and they must be charged. But as I said, the technology is advancing in such a manner that it's becoming much easier to provide those support services in a manner that is suitable to a wide variety of customers. And
I'm dying to ask you the question: what EV do you drive?
I've got a Tesla Model Y.
I'll head off in my Kia e-Niro then.
I had a Niro. A few years ago. It's a good car. I like that car.
Yeah, they're great. But I aspire to have a Model Y, maybe one day.
Yeah.
Alan, it's been a joy to talk to you again. Take care. Keep growing. Keep doing all the things you do with such quality and passion. Love your work.
All right, mate. Take care.
See you, buddy. Take care.